What is up, everybody? Bills preseason is officially over. That's a good thing to have. I know a lot of people were looking forward to the preseason being done. It is now 2 weeks till kickoff, and the Bills have a lot of roster decisions that they have to make in the next 2 days. Generally, the Bills get ahead of these roster decisions. We've seen that in the past. I don't know. They've been taking it down to the wire lately. Last year, the actual cuts came down at Tuesday at 6 p.m., much after the official time of 4 o'clock. So we're going to might have to stay tight, especially with this roster. Will the Bills make any trades on Monday or Tuesday? Remains to be seen, but I think that they very well could. Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. This is a special edition of the Bills Postgame Show. I'm your host, Kevin Massare, rocking this thing solo here from the Built-in Buffalo Podcast Network. But as you look at the performance today, as the Bills went pretty shallow, they went two Bs. Like, I wouldn't even call this 2 As. They went 2 Bs with 3s, and then really players not even practice squad level. So, you kind of look at the initial drive with Bryce Young. The Bills played it, I thought, fairly well for really being 1s on 2.5s. Almost the third unit was in there for the Bills against Bryce Young, and I thought they played okay. You still have Jamarcus Ingram locking down starting receivers in this league. I think he every bit as much short up, and he was probably one of maybe 4 to 5 players who were making this roster that played a lot, at least early on. So you saw a good bit of Jamarcus Ingram being able to shut down what we saw from the Carolina Panthers. So that was very easy to see. We really appreciate everybody tuning in to the post-game show. There's a lot of coverage out there. Sean McDermott just spoke. And one of the topics I wanted to start off with was Tyler Bass. And now you don't usually see Sean McDermott say things. That's one he's got to have. Occasionally he'll say that about Josh Allen. Like, you'll see that. Like, Josh Allen needs to make that throw. I mean, he's Josh Allen. So I think you feel pretty comfortable with, telling him about certain throws. You're not going to really wreck his confidence. But outside of that, you don't really hear McDermott say, like, that player's got to have it. So him missing that 51-yard field goal was pretty telling. To me, it's not like the world's biggest deal, but I guess combination with how he's looked at practice, that confidence issue, and quite frankly, getting paid, there's no way for him off the roster. So anyone, even myself, that's like, hey, replace Tyler Bass. You can't. You just honestly put yourself in a really bad cap situation. And he hasn't really. I mean, that's his first real field goal he's missed in a game that semi-counts this season. So we have to actually see how that translates going deep into the year. But right now, I mean, he's going to be your kicker. Next year is even hard enough to get rid of him. You could. Next year is really the first year you could kind of let him go as 28 years old. But you still only save $1.6 million. That would just pay for your new kicker anyways. But at least there's a pathway after this year if he does not produce. But I'm not going to overly worry about it until he's missing kicks in big games. Like, we talk a lot about it. I don't like the special teams unit in general. I think there's a lot of lapses, a lot of problems. But his last kickoff was, I think he was celebrating it. And I think a lot of people are still getting into these kickoff rules. But he kicked it and the ball hit in inbounds in the kick zone and then went through the end zone. The ball went to the 20. So the ball actually hits the zone and then rolls through. That's what you're looking for. That's what Tyler Bass was able to do on one of his kickoffs today. So I think there's a lot to be desired on special teams in general. There's a lot of issues there that has exacerbated with Tyler Bass, but I need to see some regular season misses when it matters and even not matters in the regular season for me to really start talking about like cap ramifications. They're not going to move away from Tyler Bass. I mean, at the absolute earliest, it would be spring of next year. I mean, that's if with a catastrophic year. If he's really, really bad, the Bills will have to put somebody on his practice squad and then make moves from there. But that's like an extreme situation that I don't know that is going to come up. But the coverage unit was poor. Special teams in general still commits their penalties. I didn't overly like what they were able to do all day. That's just an ongoing issue with Matt Smiley. But we'll put him to the side for now, and we'll kind of talk about the offense, which I thought had a good day. The best day that they've had so far. Josh Allen had 1 quarter out of 12. And other than that, and got pulled during the second drive where he was driving and probably would have scored. But really, we saw Ben DiNucci take command of the offense. We thought Anthony Brown. We saw a great drive with Frank Gore Jr. We saw KJ Hamler late in the game at the goal line. It's tough for me to think that if KJ Hamler was on the roster, he's taking big-bodied goal line snaps deep in the fourth quarter. So I don't think that's all that great. It's cool and fun, and they're probably hoping for him to be a premier practice squad player for them. Maybe one of the first call-ups on call-ups on one of the two. But that's really not overly great taking snaps into the fourth quarter. It's never been a good sign, especially as a non-rookie. Or UDFA. That's not a good sign as for anybody that's been in the league at all, let alone even rookies. It's not a good sign for. So Hamler was a guy that I thought had made a play for the roster. I personally think the Bills go with 5 there. So we kind of talk about like, what did the Bills offense do? I thought their O-line was great. Their run blocking has been fantastic this offseason into the preseason. I think it's super deep across the O-line. You have a lot of talent there. Now, no one's sitting here saying you have number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in the league offensive linemen. You have some really good starters. You have some good depth, and you have some tradable assets. And the Bills have even traded players like Russell Bodine, Ryan Bates, depending on the talent level at junctures of the Bills' recent history. So like we can't sit here and say, and then one of the most infamous ones, so like trading, Teller. They still got back more than they drafted him for. And at the time, I think Bean's pumping his fists. So it's really good hindsight. The player was worth something because he showed, he just didn't fit the old offensive line coach. And that's just a complete bummer, who's now obviously long gone and has struggled in his career being an offensive line coach. But someone like Cromer probably would have loved Teller. But outside of that, like if you look at the offensive line as a whole, you got the 5 starters. Then you have the backup 5, which I think is really solid. I mean, you're looking at Van Pran Granger, who got some run at center today, which was good to see. You got Alec Anderson. You have Ryan Vandemark. You had Richard Garage. You have a plethora of guys. I like Tylen Grable and Lyle Collins. I mean, you really have 11 guys to me. And then Will Clapp, who's hurt when the concussion protocol. But the Bills probably like his experience, and he was playing pretty decent. So there's 10 to 12 guys at the offensive line position, and I like each and every one of them. I know Lyle Collins has his issues. He's the 8th or 9th offensive lineman. They paid him to be on the roster. I would be shocked if he is cut on cutdown day. The Bills have already paid him. I guess they could cut him and put him on practice squad. They would prefer to have his services. And he's every bit as much as like the Jermaine Ifedi, Bobby Hart, even in that guise of player. I just think he makes the roster. There's nothing that he's done that has showed me like he's so bad he needs to be cut. I think he's a solid backup 7th, 8th offensive lineman in the league. If you got to rely on him as your starting guard, I'd be a little bit concerned, but he's definitely a good veteran. So the offensive line, shout out to them. Going to be some tough decisions there, but the Bills are going to not want to lose players like Jack Anderson, who's playing for Carolina today, and by accounts out of their reports that he just got signed and looking like he's going to make the roster. I think the Bills would prefer to keep Grable. They're sick of losing some of their late round draft choices, whether it's Rashad Wildgoose, Jack Anderson. I think there's, Luke Tenuta a few years ago. I think they're sick of losing some of those draft choices that Bean makes. It's time that you roster those young, cheap, talented O-line players. So I think that Grable is going to make the roster. I think that they keep 10 offensive linemen, the 5 starters. I got Van Pran Granger and Grable on the roster. Then obviously Vandemark, Alec Anderson, and Lyle Collins. You throw Will Clapp on the practice squad. You hope that Richard Garage makes the practice squad. And there's your 12 offensive linemen this season, 10 of which you're stashing on the roster. You just can't cut Grable or Van Pran Granger. So you're not going to cut Vandemark or Alec Anderson. So you're really kind of going back and forth on Lyle Collins. I just think the amount he paid, and I just think you roster him. There's no real reason to mess around with the roster that much over a roster spot. I think that's a pretty straightforward roster grouping. We'll see how it turns out. You could expose Grable to the waiver wire. I think he's done enough to where someone in that position would claim him and stash him on their inactives list, especially at an athletic tackle position. That is one where players absolutely get waived and claimed. So if you're looking at the possible claimings on this Bills roster, Grable would be at toward the top of the list of a player I could see get claimed. You may only lose 1 or 2, but Grable would be on that list for me of somebody that would get claimed. One of the biggest performances that we had today was, leading the preseason right now. I don't have the live updates, but as of the moment, when back in the 3rd, early 4th, was Frank Gore Jr. leading the preseason in rushing. So that's going to be enough. Generally speaking, everybody has a middling UDFA or guy that they like, but even Raheem Blackshear, who is on the Panthers, was claimed. So commonly we hear like, these guys aren't going to get claimed. There's so many cuts and only 1 or 2% of them are getting. But so roster like the Bills, people take notice to, and they lose 1 to 2 players every year. Will it be Frank Gore Jr. if the Bills try to expose him to waivers? That's what we're thinking about here. Will he follow the Grable mode, or will everybody have that running back that they think that they like? Will someone face injuries or early injuries or late injuries that would claim him in a couple of days? Frank Gore Jr. has done everything to make a roster, but is it his year? Well, everyone would have said, well, he would have made it in a different year. I don't know that that's true. Like, how would you put him on the roster last year with Damian Harris, with Latavius Murray? Like, there is just, and then you still had Ty Johnson, who himself had to go to the practice squad before earning a role after the Damian Harris injury. And it was said that the Rams wanted to claim him up, sign him from our practice squad. So it's equally as hard last year to have made the roster. I just think at some point you stash one of these talented running backs like Miami does, and you got to have inactives on game day anyways. So the difference is, like, you're worried about him or Grable, who would be inactive on game day, getting claimed by another team. So I think that's why you're thinking about how do we possibly use those inactives that we have to have anyways on game day. Basically, essentially stashed players is what a healthy inactive is in the NFL. You have the opportunity to stash him away there. So the Bills use a roster spot there and go light at receiver. I think it's possible that they're going to go light at receiver. And that's definitely a position that I want to talk about now as a receiver. I mean, yeah, Deon Cain probably was the best player offensively, weapon-wise in the game. I think he played himself and what he was able to do in the UFL. The problem with him is that he's going to take a vet spot away. So if you use Deon Cain, you're going to essentially have to use one of those vet spots, and there's 6 of them you're allowed to have on your practice squad. So at some point at 28 years old, will he ever be part of your team? I mean, it's going to be tough. I mean, he's played back to 2018 when he was drafted, but only really appeared in games in 2019. So he had an early career opportunity with Deon Cain. I think that he possibly will make the practice squad. I think that's a good spot for him. But then you're keeping a guy like, did he do more than Isabella? The Bills will have to make that decision if they'd rather keep Isabella on their practice squad or a Deon Cain type. But I like Deon Cain. I think that 28 years old, will he ever have it? I don't know. He showed some flashes today against backups, but he does seem to show like he's a polished player and much better than some of the players that were defending him in this game. So Deon Cain did have a good day. A guy that probably could have played his way onto the practice squad. Definitely one of the players that, had made a push for that in that position. But I still think it's just the 5 receivers that make the roster, the 5 that everybody knows. Some from MVS to Mac Hollins to obviously Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, and Curtis Samuel. So I don't know that the Bills will feel like they need to roster Shavers. Like, here's the problem with Shavers. I guess he plays a little bit of special teams. Remains to be seen how effective he is on that unit. He needs to make that touchdown catch today. Like, if he's not making that catch, great route. This is what he showed last offseason that I had a problem with. He dropped a lot of passes. So we were all over Keon Coleman last week about this. It's not the world's best throw. Neither was Trubisky's. I don't care what anyone said. That Trubisky throw wasn't great. Should he catch it a guy that's drafted that high? Yes. Is he going to make a business decision in the preseason when your team has already been banged up to not get laid out in the ribs or chest or neck to make that? I just don't know that that's a crazy bad decision. In a regular season game, I can't have him dropping that. In the preseason, when you're already with ones out of the game in a rain sloppy game, I don't know that I'm going to hold that against somebody. But in a perfect elements day today, on a similar kind of play where you're open and you need to make the play, sailed a little bit on DiNucci. Could have made the world's best throw or obviously made a top 10 quarterback in the league throw, but there's a reason he's Ben DiNucci and not Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen. He's fighting for the 3rd quarterback job, short-term 2nd quarterback job for a reason. He wasn't signed as of 2 weeks ago. So you're not going to get perfect passes from Ben DiNucci, who ran a pretty solid offense today. I would see, there's probably going to be talks that Ben DiNucci and Anthony Brown ran a better offense than Mitchell Trubisky does. We're probably going to hear that because they're not going to see any of the 3 ever again, hopefully in a game. So we're going to obviously always hang on to the fact that like the offense looked a lot better under these guys. Last week was a rain-soaked game. Mitchell Trubisky got hurt and didn't look great in the first place. The week prior was just a win fest. You couldn't even punt. You couldn't do really anything. this might have been the day where Mitchell Trubisky, the offense seemed to be moving. Jack Plummer was moving on all cylinders, a guy that early in the game, at least when Bills are playing more of their roster players, I didn't think looked great at all. But then came in against players like Kyron Brown, who just had a miserable day, in my opinion, and looked good. But the Bills offense also looked pretty solid as well. Another 164 yards rushing. Just kind of dominated. Darrington Evans with a nice touchdown catch as well. He's always been able to flash that receiving ability and that speed that every year somebody, the Bears, the Dolphins, even the Bills have flirted with Darrington Evans of rostering him. Tennessee obviously, drafted him in the 3rd round for a reason. The Bears have loved him at times, including, 2022 and 2023. The Dolphins even rostered him, and Mike McDaniel knows. Say what you want about him, but I think he just like Sean McDermott knows his DBs, I'll give him credit for knowing his running backs. And Darrington Evans is always a guy that is of interest to somebody like Mike McDaniel. Got hurt, looked okay to me. Frank Gore Jr. as well got hurt, but looked also okay. So ultimately, it's going to be a matter of, I think they have some riches at that running back position. There's 5 guys that I think could make a roster. It's definitely a running back 3. So you have Johnson and Ray Davis, who are absolutely like a running back 2 styles. And then you have obviously James Cook, who is a running back 1. But I think you ultimately have a couple of running backs. You have a couple of running back 2s and a couple of running back 3s. There could be a team of interest to where you could trade Darrington Evans to. Someone might come calling for Frank Gore. Would you move him? I think he has shown enough to where, like, with his pedigree and what he's able to do, he's got great vision like his father. I just don't trade him. I don't cut him. I think messing around with players because, like, you think that, you're going to need to roster another linebacker when really running back, you just want to roster your best players. And I don't think doing 4 running backs is that crazy. I guess you already have to roster a Reggie Gilliam, but he's a special teamer. He practices in the tight end group. I just don't consider him anywhere near like the running back room. He's just going to be like Cam Lewis of the offense, where both of those guys, you keep 1 and 1 on each side of the ball, who kind of just play teams and do a little bit of everything. I just don't consider them in my position groups when I'm going through my positions. So I don't think it's crazy that you could roster a 4th running back after last year, after, Murray had his ups and downs and Harris got hurt. The Bills were looking around. They even called up Ty Johnson, who's now earned a job. So I just think it's quite possible that you could use a stashing spot on the preseason leading rusher as of a few hours ago. I don't know if someone late in the day has taken over for some of these last preseason games, has gone crazy or something. But as of then, he was leading the league in preseason rushing, which, isn't crazy, but does put out enough film. It was good film. It's not like he was getting 4,000 carries and ran 2 yards a carry. He was getting good film out there. So he's definitely somebody that I think put out enough film to be a successful claim. So between him, we'll have to see how that injury goes. I don't envision it being long-term by the way he was looking and interacting with his father and just going into the x-ray room, which I thought was weird. You would be going in the x-ray room to kind of check out the bones around there. And usually, usually you don't find anything there. And if you would have heard something, but he was walking fairly fine. I don't have any issues with Frank Gore Jr. I think you have to think long and hard about it. If you put that guy with that name and what he did in college, he was really successful in college, and what he was able to do mostly in the last 2 preseason games, put out a lot of good film. I just think that could be a guy that could get claimed. And the Bills they didn't sign a veteran running back. They rolled with Ty Johnson. They drafted obviously Ray Davis. And then they said, Frank Gore, this Junior, this is your, we're not going to sign anybody. We're going to sign you as a UDFA. But I think ultimately he's done enough to make the roster, and I would roster Frank Gore Jr. And I don't believe that injury to be too bad, but we'll hear. Could be one of the 2 stashes. The Bills have 2 stashes that they can make now before the roster is set. So Matt Milano obviously is one of them. He's going to go on the IR prior to the roster being set. Bills have another one to use. Will it be on someone will they stash Frank Gore with that for 4 weeks to see how the running back room looks? Will it be Mitchell Trubisky that gets stashed? They don't have a ton of candidates that are out for 4 weeks. That they'll want to stash. Frank Gore could be on that list if this injury is at all week to week. The Bills could utilize one of the early two. You're going to use 2 IR spots because they're given to you by the NFL. So one's going to Matt Milano. I think MVS and Curtis Samuel, if they don't suit up week 1, they're playing week 2. So you're not going to stash any of those guys. I don't really have a hot other candidate. So the Bills will use a candidate for that with that stashing. Will it be Frank Gore? I guess that'd be a way to get through all this mumbo jumbo of the roster cut situation and still be able to use him middle of the season if there's a running back injury. He's high up there to use one of those 2 IR spots. And then obviously you can still do the parking lot with Reed Ferguson or Deion Jones or with whomever that you're going to roster as a veteran, where you can continue to roster players that are hurt if there's more than 2 that are needed, like we've seen in years past. But you're given 2 for free now by the league so that you don't have to do too many parking lot cuts. But I don't think the Bills even have to. But right now it would be Milano and Trubisky, but will Frank Gore Jr., be a third? I don't know. He looked okay to me, but they could use that as a way to stash him going forward. So really liked what I saw from the offense. We kind of talked about that a lot. The O-line played super well once again. A lot of players there that the Bills are going to want to hold on to. And then I still think they go, I'm going to lock in 5 receivers. I could be wrong. They could roster Shavers or Hamler. Shavers, I think, just gets through waivers. You can call him up the first 2 weeks, see what you have. And then if you need to roster him week 3 on, go for it if there's any injuries. I just don't think he's getting claimed. I don't think anybody in the league is claiming Shavers. And then Hamler is what qualifies as a vet, so he can go right to your practice squad if you'd like. So he's played enough in this league to be in that situation. I just don't think you're running. He's being used in the running back situation if he's on your roster. That's kind of how I'll feel with that situation. So, he's another draft pick of 2020. He has played at times. So KJ Hamler is definitely somebody that is right on the border, but I know it was maybe the Bills didn't want to trot out another running back. But him playing deep into the game in general is never a great sign. He has 4 years of experience. So that's going to be a tough choice. But if we talk about the defense here for a little bit, and if there's anything else that we want to talk about there's nothing really else here to talk about. I just don't think that there's 5 receivers, more than 5 receivers to roster. Anybody else can go on the practice squad. I don't think that there's much debate whether, like, maybe Shavers could be more effective for the offense than somebody else. I just don't think you need to use a roster spot on him. I don't think there's anyone claiming them. And then lastly, my guy Zach Davidson didn't talk about tight end at all. What another good room. You have 3 guys that the Bills really are confident in. They feel like they have a tight end 1, 2, and 3. And then McKitty with that great catch on the 2-point conversion, making other catches. Like McKitty can block. Like, he is shown to be useful in this offense. Like, he is a dark horse roster candidate. And then you put Davidson through waivers and hope they get him on the practice squad. Both of those 2 are dark horse. You're only keeping 5 receivers in my prediction. They're dark horse roster players for sure. Like, that you keep 4 tight ends. You play a lot of 12. You can do different things with each of them. One's going on the practice squad for sure. The other has a shot to make the roster. So you're definitely going to keep both on the practice squad, if not one of them being on your active roster. So that's going to be a really interesting thing. Those are 5 good NFL tight ends. Like, I don't mean to say they're fantasy players. You're going to draft them. I just meant that if their level, they're good NFL tight ends. Like, there's good depth there to where, like, the drastic difference between like Quentin Morris and Zach Davidson, I don't think is that big. So I think that that's something to keep in your thoughts as the Bills are making their predictions and their final roster. And as you make your predictions, I think that you could see Zach Davidson or Trey McKitty on the roster as dark horse candidates. Those are some of my final dark horse candidates for sure. And then, the Bills will hope that they can get either of them 2 through the practice squad. McKitty, they were both draft choices and they were both in the same draft. So the Bills definitely had scouted them, just like they have done a pretty good job scouting tight ends since Dawson Knox. There's been a couple of guys that they've liked throughout a lot of these draft classes. So they must have really done a lot of work on the draft class when it came to McKitty. So he was a guy that I liked when he was drafted by the Chargers. So we're going to see he's only 25, 3rd round pick in 2021. Davidson was a 5th round pick. I think that the Bills think that they have something going on with that tight end room. Is it another room they could trade from? There's absolutely a position to be said that someone would call you for McKitty or for Davidson. There's no doubt about it. I don't feel like teams are 3 deep at tight end. So those are, once again, the Bills have 3 tight end 3s. In my opinion, I think that someone could call you from Morris to Davidson to McKitty. We'll see if either of those 3 are on the Bills as they're tweaking their final roster to maybe acquire a 6th receiver like Terrace Marshall, who scored in this game, playing late in the preseason into the 3rd quarter. Never a good sign for anybody, let alone players who have been in the league for a little bit. Never a good sign to see. So as we transition to the defense now, because we've talked about offense, of course, for 25 minutes, a little bit about Bass. I think the D-line is playing good football. Like, I think they're penetrating. The run defense was great today, which was good to see on all levels. The Bills are winning at the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. I feel pretty confident on that, especially as they're utilizing their 2s. There's a lot of good defensive line play, in my opinion. Obviously, the Bills are mixing and matching a little bit at linebacker. But on the defensive line, like, there is a lot of, Brandon Beane's now alluded to it twice, both in his 3rd quarter interview and in his interview on One Bills Live yesterday, how deep he feels his defensive line is especially, and he, in his words, not mine, edge. And there are a lot of people who are like, well, in my opinion, edge isn't that good. I think that everybody always looks at what's confusing for roster development is that people will look at, like, I think only Rousseau is the best only good player on the defensive end. Well, maybe he's the only one that could compete against defensive ones in this league, but you got guys like Epinesa, Smoot, and Von Miller at this stage of his career. They're all defensive end 2s. Nobody's sitting here saying that they're Micah Parsons, but those are 3. Epinesa has affected games. Like, he was the best player in Jacksonville before, or in London against Jacksonville before he got hurt. He's played well against Kansas City. Like, he is a guy that's really good as a defensive end 2. Now, no one's sitting here saying he's the top 15 defensive end in the league. The Bills brought him back for a reason. Von Miller has shown a lot of great flashes, and Smoot, coming off of an injury last year, is a good football player. He's a good rotational guy. They got a lot of spark out of Javon Solomon, who plays special teams. Kingsley Jonathan just always shows up in the preseason. You still even see Cameron Klein, who the Bills have held on to, make plays. Casey Tuhill was in the backfield, and then Rondell Bothroyd got a sack today, who obviously blew by his assignment today. Who you're absolutely get used to Rondell Bothroyd's name. He's definitely going on the practice squad. Like, he is a guy the Bills are going to develop. He has shown flashes throughout camp, in my opinion. I really like what I've seen from him. Almost 6'3", roughly 280. He's a 24-year-old rookie, but he's definitely somebody from Oklahoma that I think the Bills will continue to develop. He seems to have those chops in the league, but he's definitely going to the practice squad for now. But he is somebody that I would get used to seeing sticking around this Bills roster, at least on a practice squad capacity, in Rondell Bothroyd. So I think that he's like a shoo-in for the practice squad, in my opinion. Some of these guys that have a lot of these flashy plays, these are the interesting ones that teams can claim. So just like Kingsley Jonathan a few years ago when he was claimed by the Bears before making the roster last year. He got claimed, and I wasn't saying shocked, but I was fairly shocked. And you never know if somebody like Rondell Bothroyd put enough out in college, mixed with some of the stuff that they were able to see when they sent scouts out, that some of these random players, in our opinion, random, are the ones that are claimed. Last year, 67 total tackles, 4th on the team, 16.5 tackles for a loss, and 8 sacks. That's every bit as much as of a guy that put out some decent college film, playing 5 years at Wake Forest before coming to Oklahoma, and being really successful. 16.5 career sacks. Didn't play great at Oklahoma last year, but in his final season at Wake Forest was really good. 30, once again, lots of tackles for losses, and we saw that today. 34 tackles for losses in college. 4 forced fumbles. Definitely a guy that teams could see the potential in. Played well today. The Bills' defensive line unit is really deep. I don't think that there's any crazy. It's not crazy to say that somebody will call you and say, "Hey, what do you want for Kingsley Jonathan?" Or, is Rondell Bothroyd? We might claim him anyways. You got a guy in the back of my roster that you might want. Those things aren't that crazy. The Bills have traded UDFA for UDFA before. They've acquired Ryan Bates as a UDFA. So it's not like just because you're a UDFA, you don't get traded. Obviously, like Javon Solomon taking up that 5th defensive end. You have Smoot that can bounce inside and outside. Absolutely. So that's why I think the Bills will ultimately be fine with 4 defensive tackles. Really good for defensive tackle rotation. I don't really see a need to roster a fifth at this stage of the Bills roster. But, they're going to probably try to keep Eli Ankou or Deshaun Williams on the practice squad, either or. Gable Steveson, probably. I don't know what you do with a guy like that. And then Dean, Dean was starting today, which is an interesting thing. So, I'm going to take away nothing out of that other than, who is going to the practice squad from this. And starting today with some roster level players, that means the Bills may want to see him in practice with these guys. And Branson Dean's probably a guy, as well as Rondell Bothroyd, from these defensive line, that's going to the practice squad. And then you'll probably also put on either Deshaun Williams or Cameron Klein, something around those lines as you wrap up the defensive line unit. And then Casey Toohill, the Bills brought him in. He's rotational sack guy, 6 sacks. It isn't a guy that is just a fodder player that everyone thinks. He is a guy that the Bills probably saw in the mold or guise of a Shaq Lawson replacement style, that veteran 5th offensive lineman. Obviously, that's probably going to go to Solomon now. But wouldn't be crazy for them to roster 6 defensive ends and 4 defensive tackles. It's not that wild. So I think that would that go to Casey Toohill or Kingsley Jonathan? The Bills have a player they can trade from this unit. I'm sorry if you think that it's not that good of a unit. Brandon Beane does, and Brandon Beane probably has some counterparts that may be making a phone call for that defensive end position specifically. I think they have a really good 4-man defensive tackle rotation, and at the top, it's probably better than the defensive ends. But the depth, defensive end 4 through 6, from Smoot to Solomon to Kingsley Jonathan to Casey Toohill to even looking down to Rondell Bothroyd. There's some guys there that can make a roster. And the Bills may capitalize on that if they think they can go out and acquire a Terrace Marshall or another player at another position that the Bills feel like they could utilize. Getting into the linebacker play a little bit, obviously you didn't see Dorian or Terrell Bernard, which was great. I'm glad they sat. Obviously, Balin Spector is always hurt. So you really only saw, and then Nicholas Morrow didn't play, so you really only saw Buffalo Joe, Deion Jones, and really Eddie Adeduafon Alafoshio. Were really all we saw from the linebacker room for the most part. So you obviously are going to lock in Bernard, Dorian Williams, Matt Milano to the IR. I just don't know that you need to keep 6 here either. I think you go 5 linebackers and you hope Deion Jones can go to your practice squad. Terrell Bernard, Dorian Williams. I think you stash Eddie. I just don't think the Bills will want to waive him in Nicholas Morrow. Now the question is, did Joe Andreessen do enough to make it as the 6th linebacker? That's going to be the decision that, we're going to have to make as a team. And then if he did he do more than Balin Spector to be that position and Deion Jones? So I think that ultimately Deion Jones is just looking like the first guy up, the guy on the practice squad. You can waive him, put him right on practice squad as a veteran. Nicholas Morrow, we didn't see a lot of. He started in this league, and he's been good in this league. I think Nicholas Morrow is every bit as much as your first guy there now. It's a shame we didn't get to see him a bunch, but the Bills didn't play their starters a bunch in the way it worked out in this specific preseason anyways. So he's been right there involved. But if you figure that Terrell Bernard and Dorian Williams are your starters, Nicholas Morrow's right there as well. And Olafoshio are your 4 linebackers. And then who makes it as your 5th? Is it Spector? And do you keep a 6? Is it Spector and Buffalo Joe? It's tougher. I don't really know how they're going to interpret his great performance. Great against the run, really shoots the gap. And then you saw a team that passed a lot today. Wow. The Panthers threw the ball a lot. The Bills did not game plan for that. And that's why you saw some defensive back against backup DBs on top of it. You saw some issues. The Bills did not expect them to throw for 300 yards. I mean, it's as bad as a DB performance as I've seen. But the Bills, they were running a soft shell. They were deliberately not game planning for Jack Plummer. So ultimately, there's not much that you can take away too much from these DBs, especially the ones that played. So Buffalo Joe did not look great in coverage. He had that miscommunication with Deion Jones, so a little bit exposed today. The Bills have a tough decision. I don't know how they're going to feel about needing to stash him or Spector. That's really, I just think you keep 5 linebackers, Deion Jones on the practice squad. So who is the 5th? Is it, and maybe that the Bills will say, you know what, this is Deion Jones. I'm not messing around with this. We'll throw Spector and Buffalo Joe on the practice squad. One or the other gets claimed, okay, where the other one's going to be our 6th linebacker. I think Brandon Beane might ultimately make that decision because, once again, if they go heavy at tight end, like we were just talking about, or if they do end up keeping someone like Casey Toohill or Kingsley Jonathan, who's made rosters before, then you're going to go 5 linebackers, because here's how I look at weak positions. Everybody's like, well, defensive end is good, so you're going to stash, you're going to be able to stash more. True. That's how I feel. However, some people are like, well, linebacker stinks. You don't want to get in a situation to where you're bad again. But rostering bad players is tough for your roster in terms of guys you don't think are getting claimed. The Bills use the roster exception. They use the call-ups. They use, obviously they drafted, international players. So they like that roster exception. And they'll also utilize the fact that I want guys on my practice squad that can come up. They do it in the postseason all the time, whether it's, Devontae Freeman or something along those lines. Stills, players along that mindset of like, dude, like we want this player on the roster in emergency, but I'm not going to roster him. So I think that's where they utilize this practice squad like an extension of the roster. It's the Bills. It's important to make the Bills practice squad. It's not to any of us. The Bills use this and Beane was talking about this in different interviews, where they use this like an extension, 69-man roster. So yes, they don't play every day, and yes, they could technically be picked up by somebody else. The Bills really love the 6 vet spots. That's why, ultimately, you can't put these guys on the roster who wouldn't get claimed. So I think the Bills can do a little bit better job, and I think Beane has been thinking about this, of who stop having players get claimed, use all 6 veteran spots, and they have a tough decision. To make this a long story short, they have a tough decision at the linebacker position. Spector versus Buffalo Joe. I mean, that's really what it is to me. I think Deion Jones is going to be, I just don't roster 6 of them. There's just no need, in my opinion. And maybe the Bills will use that IR spot we just talked about. If it's not on Frank Gore Jr., maybe it could be on Balen Spector again, that he gets stashed with that. They stash Buffalo Joe. They put Deion Jones on the practice squad. So ultimately there's decisions they can make at the linebacker room. I just think you keep 5. You keep 5 there. Because for the last position group of the day before we sign off here, thanks for everybody tuning in to the Built-in Buffalo post-game show. A lot of roster decisions here, a lot of things to break down, a lot of things going on. But as we look forward to the play today, let's talk about DBs from corners to safeties. My guy Corey Couch was coached under with Adai, the Bills defensive corners coach. And he showed to be a step ahead of a lot of these back end of the roster guys. A lot of there's Lovely there. There's Kyron Brown there, who looked terrible, by the way. I just don't want him in our organization. He's been here for a while, and he's still making just plays that just doesn't show me that he can be on this level. You got a player like Jamarcus Ingram, who played and started and showed that he's ready for here. He's covering talented receivers down the field in this game. And, you have guys like Kyron Brown, who can't even cover guys who aren't going to make the Carolina Panthers. I'm done with him. He's a guy that Bills have stashed in this practice squad role for years. He just doesn't look like he does enough to me to really be there. And what a play by Ingram on Deontay Johnson early in this game. He's covering number 1 receivers. He's shown to the ability to do that in the past when the Bills have had injuries as a boundary corner, most notably week 2 against Miami a couple of years ago, where the Bills had nobody playing in the defensive backfield, and they still almost won when Josh dirted it to Isaiah McKenzie. Isaiah McKenzie is an interesting player. Will the Bills claim somebody like him? I've heard that talk a little bit. Will the Bills go get another second quarterback? There's so many things that are going on the Bills roster development standpoint. But to Corey Couch, look good. He's a guy the Bills are going to hope they can get through to their practice squad. Daquan Hardy was really good in the return game. I think probably won the starting returner job. Was making great decisions with the ball going out of bounds, to it rolling through to the end zone, to kneeling it. He showed like he was really developed, and this is funny to say, but really developed as a returner the last 2 weeks. And ultimately, with him getting a majority of those, I think it's his job. So I think he's on the roster. I like Hardy he's been great. What a camp from Hardy. The Bills find these guys, these Christian Benfords, these Levi Wallaces, Taron Johnson even. They just develop these guys underneath McDermott. And Daquan Hardy's definitely going to be one of those players who can play inside, outside, return. What a versatile piece to have as one of the last guys on your active roster. I think he's not only on the roster, I think he's active on game days, which is a pretty tough feat to be in the Bills' active game day roster, especially on the defensive side of the ball. That's a pretty good feat to be able to do as a rookie, especially as a day 3 pick, let alone a first round pick. So Daquan Hardy's on the roster to me. So let's look through it real quick. You got Christian Benford, Taron Johnson, Russell Douglas. That's as good as a corner trio gets. PFF ranks him in the top 15. Some advanced metrics per EPA per play data ranks him in the top 10. And then you have the coverage separation scores by Christian Benford, one of the best in the league at preventing separation against him. He's a good player. That's a good football player right there. He's going to need to get paid at some point in a couple of years. And then obviously you have Kyrie Elam, who played as well. I mean, ho-hum day from him. No good, no bad. So I guess we'll take that away. Obviously you have Cam Lewis, who's going to be, a safety in this defense, I think, but is that versatile piece like the Reggie Gilliam of the defense. But Ingram made his way onto the roster, and Daquan Hardy. So those are my 6 corners. Ingram and Hardy as the 5 and the 6, Kyer as the 4, and the 3 starting corners. That's pretty straightforward to me. And then the safety room, I think, is going to be Rapp, Hamlin, Mike Edwards, Cole Bishop, and Cam Lewis. I mean, that's your 5. So you're looking at 11 DBs. That's why you can only keep 5 linebackers to make up, 16 there. And then you're going to most likely keep 9 or 10. So you're looking at 25 to 26 players on defense. And the final roster spot, as we talked about on Going Deep Buffalo, will it be somebody like Buffalo Joe, Balin Spector, or will they go with 6 defensive ends and say, you know what, we want Kingsley Jonathan and Javon Solomon on this roster, and then you can make those decisions appropriately. But right now I have 9 defensive linemen, I have 5 linebackers to make 14, and then the 11 DBs we just went over to make 25 players. We'll keep it at 25 and 25. It's not going to be as linear as that. Could be 26, 24. I don't think it usually goes too much more lopsided than an extra 2 on one side of the ball than the other. But you really could go 23, 27 if you wanted. I don't think the Bills overly stack it like that, but they could feel that they need to if they'd like to. But I ultimately are going to keep it at 25 on defense, 25 on offense. And then that odd men out. I mean, Kareem Jackson going to the practice squad for sure, showed flashes today of being able to step in. D. Delaney did nothing. Kendall Williamson's rough. Terrell Burgess is hurt. So I think that Kareem Jackson earned the 5th safety role. And if the Bills are hurt, he'll make the roster. I think that Kareem Jackson is going to make the roster. But you have Cam Lewis, who can kind of be that guy right now. So I think Kareem Jackson is the safety out of the bunch between D. Delaney, Kendall Williamson, and Terrell Burgess, who's going for sure to the practice squad and will be the first call up. But interesting comments by Brandon Beane about Mike Edwards. I really think he's your starting safety day 1. I think he's ready to go. I think, eventually Cole Bishop could take it from him, but I think it's Rapp and Edwards. He'll trust Edwards to run what he needs to do. But I really think Mike Edwards will be your starter. He looks good. He has 2 more weeks and he's already back. And so is Cole Bishop. Both will be on your week 1 roster. But I don't know who many who's going to go inactive there. But, the Bills are definitely going to have both of them on here. Cole Bishop could be inactive week 1. But I believe Mike Edwards, not only if Hamlin plays a lot of special teams, if he's healthy, that's going to be an interesting breakdown to the safe. But Kareem Jackson's going to instantly go to the practice squad, and then to Corey Couch. Those are the 2 guys that I have. I just think you're done with Brown. I didn't see enough of those other safeties. And I can't really comment too much besides some things that I saw in Lovely. I don't know if he's going to end up making anything that the Bills had, but only on the DBs right now. So they could go out and acquire a practice squad guy. But right now, to Corey Couch and Kareem Jackson are the 2 that I have going to the practice squad from the DB unit going forward. So, 5 linebackers. Bills do go 3 safeties a lot, and they obviously run a lot of corners. You're going to go heavy in DB. That's why you keep 11 DBs. The Bills have shown to keep 5 linebackers with only 2 starting pretty frequently. This is a year you don't need to stash some of these guys. I still think those 5 linebackers without Matt Milano is going to come back in December to be your 6th anyways. I still think those 5 are fairly decent. The Bills love Olafosio. Like every single person that talks about Olafosio, from Bobby Babbitt Jr. to Sean McDermott to even Brandon Beane, like they love this guy. He led a really good Washington defense last year. He's like going to be your stashed 5th linebacker. So, and then Nicholas Morrow has been successful in this league. He's going to be in the Terrell Dodson mold, if not more experienced. And then obviously, like, we saw a lot of good flashes from Dorian Williams to make that step leap. Will he make the Terrell Bernard leap? I don't know about that, but he's definitely going to make it a starter's leap. We'll see if that's successful. And then in insurance, they're going to have Deion Jones as the sixth linebacker ready to go anyway. So they'll have 5 active linebackers. The sixth one's going to be Deion Jones on the practice squad. And that's if they really like, if they for some reason are like, we need to stash Deion Jones, he's getting calls to go play somewhere else, they'll stash him as a sixth linebacker. But Deion Jones is going to be there as well. But Olafoshio is going to be that guy developing as the 5th round pick. So that ultimately leaves who's going to be the 4th and active linebacker. Is it going to be Buffalo Joe or is it going to be Balen Spector? And the other one's going to the practice squad. So it's going to be Deion Jones and Olafoshio as the 5th and 6th linebacker, or they're only going to keep 5 and it's going to be Balen Spector as the 4th linebacker, or it's going to be Buffalo Joe in there with Olafoshio. So will they go with Buffalo Joe and Olafoshio and Dorian Williams and Terrell Bernard, with the only veteran being Nicholas Morrow, or will they want to go a little bit more vet heavy with like a Balen Spector or even rostering Deion Jones? So the Bills have some final linebacker decisions to make, but I think that ultimately who gets claimed could matter in this position group. Deion Jones isn't getting claimed. He's going on the practice squad. And then you're going to put Spector or Buffalo Joe on the practice squad as well. And then the other 5 are going to be there. So those are your 2 linebacker practice squads. We got the 2 DB practice squads we talked about, and then Bothroyd and probably some version of Cameron Klein or whomever that they can, Casey Toohill, whoever they can get through the practice squad from the, and then you're going to obviously try your best to keep like a Branson Dean and, Gable Steveson or Deshaun Williams there at the defensive line. So that's kind of how I see. And then the Bills will go out and get 3 to 4 guys that aren't on this roster on their practice squad. But defensively, those are like my 5 or 6 defensive practice squad players who I think are pretty solid, minus anybody getting claimed at that position. Well, it's been 45 minutes and I really appreciate everybody tuning in. There's a ton of content going live to the 300 live viewers. Thank you so much for coming in here on a whim to talk about the Bills and the roster development. And we'll be live ourselves Tuesday whenever most of the roster cuts, if not all the official roster cuts, come through. So Going Deep Buffalo will be from Wednesday to Tuesday this week, just because we wanted to get out and talk about these roster moves and what the Bills could do in the trade market if they make a trade, or who got waived, and some of the players that I like that could get claimed. So I'm Kevin. I really appreciate everybody tuning in here from the Built in Buffalo post-game show. Thank you for tuning in to talk about the Bills for 50 minutes with me. There's a lot that happened, but if there's ever anything that's going to happen, it's going to happen in the next 48 hours. And I know that the Bills have been actively on the market, potentially player for player trades. We had a Carolina guest on this week. Could a Terrace Marshall be the 6th receiver? Scored a touchdown today against a bad Bills defensive back unit of players that aren't going to make the roster. You had 1 practice squad out there into Corey Couch. Other than that, like Hardy was there too, I guess. You had a bunch of players who aren't making this roster in that secondary. So and the Bills did not game plan for a 300-yard passing day. They just didn't game plan against a passing attack of Jack Plummer, who had really 3 long games, over 2 games of football total. That was ready to show that he should be on a practice squad himself. Had played some rough moments, but had a really good second half to say that he should be the 3rd quarterback. So, the Bills backup defensive, the 5th and 6th and 7th, in this case, 8th and 9th and 10th guys that aren't even going to be on the team. He was able to be successful against them. But we're going to go through all this and more on our show on Tuesday this week to break all this down. So we'll see you in 3 days, and we're going to break down all these final decisions and what the Bills roster looks like. And McDermott came out and said just yesterday or 2 days ago that the team is fairly healthy. They expect everybody to be ready week 1. I've heard that as well. I don't know what came out of today. There wasn't a ton of roster players playing anyways. Like, as long as Frank Gore Jr. is okay, I didn't really see anyone getting banged up. Darrington Evans did. But there's really not a lot going on there. Kendall Williamson, I think, went in and out of the lineup as well. Terrell Burgess got injured late but I don't think he's making the roster late in the practice week. So as well as Will Clapp with the concussion, but ultimately everybody's going to be ready week 1. They almost got through without that tackling dummy injury of Matt Milano. We're not going to blame the training staff on Matt Milano tackling the dummies. It's just not a thing. They've been healthy. And hopefully going week 1 that he's the only one missing. And someone like Buffalo Joe, like Dorian Williams, like Olafoshio, the Bills are a lot deeper at this linebacker position than last year. AJ Klein being the final cut of the roster of the preseason last year. And after Terrell Dodson, they just didn't have anything on the roster, in my opinion. Now they got Olafoshio, Nicholas Morrow, Buffalo Joe, They got Deion Jones. So there's a lot there. So let's tune into this and more. We're going to break this down in a couple of days. I'm Kevin Massare. We'll see you guys shortly here on all the Built in Buffalo content. See you soon.